Well, good morning. Welcome to this first day of fall here at the garden. I'm glad you've all chosen to be here with us this morning. You've probably heard the story about a monk. I actually think I shared it with you some time ago, but I couldn't remember exactly, and I figured if I couldn't remember, you wouldn't remember, so I'll tell it again. But it's about this monk who went into a monastery and took a vow of silence, that he couldn't speak at all. After 5 years there, he was called before the head abbot, and the head abbot gave him permission to speak 2 words, and he said, "Bed hard," and then went away. And so he went back and spent another 5 years in silence, and once again he went to see the head abbot, and the head abbot told him he could speak 2 words, and he said, "Food bad," and then he went away again. And so another 5 years passed. 15 years now he's observed this vow of silence. So he was summoned again before the abbot, who told him he could say 2 words. And he said, "I quit." And the abbot said, "Well, I'm not surprised. All you've done since you've been here is complain." Oh, see, you still laughed, so that's good. But sometimes most of us don't live in ways where we observe vows of silence, that we don't say anything at all for all that time. But maybe we should. Maybe we should think a little more carefully about what we do say. Now, this monk, whenever he did say something, it was in the nature of complaining. I wonder how many times we do that same kind of thing as well. Maybe I shouldn't say we. I know I do it too many times. For example, we'll sometimes be with a group of friends, and I'll hear myself whining about, oh, my back hurts, or about the latest medical treatment, or whatever it happens to be. And, somebody else will talk about something that's wrong with them, and I guess I try to one-up them or whatever and tell the same kind of thing here. I'm really bad about that. And unfortunately, some of the time, my husband Mike's around, and so he'll either say something or give me, that look that says, "You're doing it again, McCoy." And so I try to stop. Sometimes I succeed, not all the time. But I doubt seriously I'm the only one that has that kind of challenge, because many of us complain a lot about things. We complain about the weather. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too wet, it's too dry. We do complain about our health, I suppose, trying to get some sympathy from people. See, you heard me do it just a minute ago, so I'm expecting an aw, poor thing. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we complain about coworkers or friends or our family members and some silly little mannerism they have that drives us crazy. And we can seem to find about any reason there is to complain about something. Now, part of the reason I think we complain is that we want people to know that we're unhappy and that what we find is unpleasant. And so we want to make that sort of a public acclaim. We want somebody to pay attention. The problem is it becomes habitual for us and can be a real problem. Now, I was thinking about the ancient Israelites who were in bondage in Egypt for years and years and years and years and years. And they grumbled and they complained about being in bondage there. So along came Moses, who led them out of bondage in Egypt, led them to freedom, toward freedom, and they wound up in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, then they grumbled about being in the wilderness and everything that was wrong there and what they didn't have. And some of them even wanted to go back to Egypt again, back into the place of bondage. So it seems like wherever we are, whatever we do, we can always find a reason to complain. Maya Angelou told a story about her grandmother, and a good lesson that she learned from her grandmother. Her grandmother actually raised her in the little town of Stamps, Arkansas. And she said that her grandmother had this little store, I guess, that people would come in, and she'd be out playing, and her grandmother would see a known complainer heading toward the store, and she always called Maya to come in and have her just kind of stand off to the side. And Maya said she always obeyed her grandmother, so she came in, and then she said what would happen is that her grandmother would say something like, "Well, how are you doing today?" And the person would, in this whiny voice, say, "Oh, not so good. It's the summer heat. It's so hot, it's killing me. I hate this." And the grandmother would just stand there and go, "Uh-huh, uh-huh." And then she'd look at Maya to make sure she was paying attention to all this. Then as soon as the grumbler was out of earshot, then she would really talk to Maya about it, making sure that she'd understood what was going on there. And then she'd say something to her along the lines of, like, "Maya, there were people all over the world, black people, white people, rich people, poor people, who went to bed last night and who didn't wake up this morning. I'll tell you what, those dead people would give anything in the world to spend 5 minutes in the kind of weather that person was complaining about. And then she said this to her. So stop your complaining. What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it, but don't complain. Well, that's a good lesson that Maya learned, and probably something that we can all learn, because I suppose there's something that's a little helpful about complaining if we just use it to get something off our chest and then go on. But we don't do that. We kind of keep going there. And there's another problem with complaining. Lou Holtz said it. He said, never tell your problems to anyone. 20% don't care, and the other 80% are glad you have them. And that's often the case. Well, what do we do if we are people who are, there are a lot of people, we listen to all these complaints around us. How do we handle those situations? Because the problem is, if we hear people complaining, it has sort of a contagious nature about it, that we find ourselves complaining. We start doing the same thing. Scientists tell us that complaining actually destroys the part of the brain that does problem solving, and it just kind of turns it to mush. And furthermore, when we are around people who complain a lot, it really drags us down. It really causes us to feel hopeless and helpless, and as though there's just no point in doing anything. It puts us in a bad mood. It just doesn't help anything. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can really change things, and we do that by changing ourselves. So how, for example, do we protect ourselves if we seem to be surrounded by or find so many occasions where we are with people who are being complainers, who are negative? Well, of course, the ideal thing would be not to be around them any more than we have to, so to put some physical distance between us. Obviously, that's not always possible. And so if we have to find some mechanism to create mental and emotional distance to the best of our ability. But something that pretty often could stop a complainer is, once we've heard the complaint, to say, well, what are you doing to fix it? How do you resolve this? Because mostly that's never occurred to them. It's just simply wanting to get the complaint out. So it's important to be able to kind of stop that behavior to the extent that we can. Furthermore, we need to realize that if we're complaining, or if we're around folks who are complaining, that it doesn't get us anywhere. We really are stuck. It's not moving us forward. You may recognize the name Randy Pausch. She was a professor who had pancreatic cancer, who delivered and then wrote the book entitled The Last Lecture. And in it he said this: complaining does not work as a strategy. We all have finite time and energy. Any time we spend whining is unlikely to help us achieve our goals, and it won't make us happier. Well, what about if we're the ones who do all the complaining, that we're the ones who really need to do something about that? Well, perhaps the Bible passage, which is Paul writing a letter to the Philippians, can help us a little bit in thinking of a different way to be. This is what he says: do everything readily and cheerfully, no bickering, no second-guessing allowed. Go out into the world uncorrupted, a breath of fresh air in this squalid and polluted society. Provide people with a glimpse of good living and of the living God. Carry the light-giving message into the night. You see, I think what Paul is encouraging us to do is to live in a countercultural way, if you will, to live differently. Instead of giving in to complaining and grumbling and being negative about things, to really do this change of mind, to do a totally different mindset where we are more positive, that we are hopeful, that we are doing things, saying things that are life-giving rather than life-depleting. And in the process of that, it's probably not a bad idea to think about the counsel that Maya Angelou's grandmother said. To quote her exactly, she said this: so you watch yourself about complaining. What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Don't complain. Now, I guess I'm not saying that we have to give up complaining completely, because we always have to look for the good, and sometimes there's some good that can come out of the complaining. If, for example, we're complaining about something that we have become aware of that's unjust, that's not fair, that's a wrong that's happening, and we can call attention to it, then we can all work to try to change it. And so it can be something that can come out for good. But some of our complaints are not that. Some of those are just trivial little things that are just annoyances. It's not really a complaint. And, maybe we need to find some safe little corner somewhere where we can just go vent it and get it over with and then go on and let go of it. But we always need to try to do our best to get rid of the negativity in our lives and to try to stay as positive and hopeful as we can. There's one way I think that might help us become more positive and stay positive, and that is to really think about the good that's in our lives. Sometimes we so focus on everything that's wrong, on everything that's bad, on everything we have to deal with, that we forget that we all have good in our lives. Every one of us, no matter where we are, what we've done, there is good in our lives. And we got up this morning, we're breathing, that's good. Every one of us has something good. Maybe we should sit down and make a list of that which is right, of that which is good in our lives, a list of the things for which we're grateful, and maybe we even ought to carry it around with us. And whenever we catch ourselves about to be negative, about to complain, maybe we need to pull that list out of our pocket and look at it again, just as a reminder. Now, the reality is, I don't think we're ever going to have a complaint-free world. Maybe the thing is we need to pay attention and just kind of get over getting irritated and annoyed and complaining about the little things. Make sure that if we do complain, it's something that we do something about, and that we do bring about good. Because when we do that, we can make things better. We can be more positive, more hopeful. But the truth is, it's up to you, and it's up to me.